Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 3, Nature and Forms of Conflict, Intrastate, Interstate. Let us have introduction about the unit. The preceding unit dealt with peace and conflict as concepts, their intricate relationship and the efforts human being made in limiting conflict in various ways. In this unit, we will proceed to discuss more concretely the efforts made to cope and deal with conflict in human relations. Before we do so, it is useful to clarify the two phrases nature and forms of conflict. Forms of conflict usually refer to level of conflict. For example, intrastate conflict relates to tensions and quarrels that occur within a state, whereas interstate conflict signifies quarrels at times leading to wars between states and countries. Here, the two types of conflicts are at two distinct levels. The term global conflict is a new term which can be understood as meaning somewhat different from interstate conflict, though it partakes of many characteristics of interstate conflict. The word nature, on the other hand, refers to a qualitative dimension. The qualitative nature of interstate conflict is entirely different from the nature of intrastate conflict. Wars, for instance, are far more serious than violent quarrels that often take place within a country, even though some of them more or less resemble our situation. When it is said that the nature or quality of interstate conflict is far more serious than intrastate conflict, we are not saying that the former is qualitative more than the latter. As a matter of fact, inter- intrastate conflict is much more frequent than interstate conflict. Yet it is recognized that wars are infinitely more dangerous than crimes committed in societies, however serious they may be. This is essentially the qualitative difference between the two, and this qualitative difference relates to diverse factors, some of which can be mentioned. First, intrastate conflict has for long been organized control, whereas interstate conflict still largely remains without effectively organized control. Secondly, the extent and the intensity of interstate conflict is vastly more threatening to societies than intrastate conflict usually inflicts. Wars, for instance, cause horrendously high damage to society, the most important being the loss of human life and property. Modern wars have become even more destructive with the increased geographical reach and destructive power of weapons. It is not surprising that eminent historians and thinkers since ancient time regarded organized war as unnatural. Now, what is intra-societal conflict? As we saw in the previous unit, conflict at the interpersonal level continues the more immediately relevant factor, as distinct from purely intrapersonal level of conflict. Though such intrapersonal conflict do have their external manifestations in the shape of interpersonal tensions, oftentimes boiling out into conflict. The psychological, physical, and pathological causes of internal conflicts within individuals cannot be discussed at length for our present context of analysis. We will confine our attention to interpersonal conflict as a conditioning factor to a larger canvas of intra-societal conflict. Then, what are interpersonal conflict? Interpersonal conflict can be regarded as the basic form of intra-societal conflict. They are the most common recurrences in all society. It has already been noticed how this occurs either due to innate human nature or due to the clash of human natures when individuals enter into relationship either at the family or wider community level. This can be regarded as the basic form of intra-societal conflict. Even at this plane of interaction, issues of sharing available resources like food, water, property, and sharing of affection and mutual respect play an important role in creating these conflicts. Whether inequalities in access to resources are real or perceived, they are the very critical causes acting and provoking human nature in its interactions with others. It should be noted that this factor as a source of conflict pervades the entire gamut of human relationships from interpersonal to intra-societal to intersocietal. Interpersonal conflicts do frequently escalate from being claims to property to violent quarrels. The latter assume sometimes criminal proportions. As the interaction among the groups grows larger and wider, obviously, the role of unequal access factor increases. In that event, conflicts assume sharper dimensions. For this reason, intra-societal tensions and conflicts impinges on societal peace in a more pronounced manner. And this fact has a bearing on the nature of conflict resolution or containment. At the family and domestic levels, conflict resolution ordinarily is managed at those levels itself through the intervention of the elders or relatives. When dispute becomes more intense and interactable for settlement within the family, the role of the state enters into the picture. In the previous unit, it is mentioned how the establishment of legal and judicial system by the state since ages past in the mechanism for conflict resolution. The law so established is itself a combination of custom, uses, and tradition and codified laws. The last category is what we call formal legislation made by legislatures, whether in the shape of all powerful kings in ancient times or democratically elected legislative assemblies in modern times. The coming of democracy and the democratic legislature constitutes an important step in the participation of common men and women in making laws and through them participating in the process of conflict resolution in their society. Let us discuss causes of intra-societal conflict. Family quarrels and feuds in the context of the larger social functions can be regarded as low-level areas of conflict. In larger grouping like villages and tribes, quarrels pertaining to water resources, sharing of pastures or wells, and river waters assume a high level of conflict. Even in hunting societies, disputes about the spoils of hunt frequently result in violent clashes. And at the stage of settled agricultural societies, quarrel about landed property become the stock in trade of societal conflict. It is these type of conflicts that are generally regarded as the visible manifestation of intra-societal conflict, encompassing in a vertical manner family disputes, community and group conflicts that affect the peace and stability of a society as a whole. It is in the view of this function of private property in causing conflict that Rousseau, in his work The Societal Contract, expressed the radical view that the person who fixed posts across a piece of land and called it his own was really the prime originator of social conflict. Later, Proudhon voiced the even more radical view that property is theft. Of course, not all thinkers are as vehemently critical of private property as source of conflict. Yet there can be no doubt that in spite of positive contribution to civilization's progress, the institution of private property is a major factor in conflict generation in society. Along with property, there are other important causes of conflict. Human groups acquire diverse type of identities. The phenomena of the function of separate identities in societies is well recognized. Identities based on religion, caste, language are the most common phenomena. Affiliations with these identities and contradiction between rival centers of loyalty often generate competition, tension, and conflict between different identity groups. It is not as if these separatist loyalties do not coexist in the larger societies. As a matter of fact, many of the societies in the past and present have experienced the phenomena of large multiple communities living within the fold of a single state. The state adopts diverse devices to hold itself together, devices ranging from adopting policies of accommodating competing claims of these social groups to using coercive of various degrees to contain the divisive effect of these claims. It is important to recognize that the separatist and the competing loyalties can sometimes threaten the very survival of the state. The state's capacity for conflict resolution at his plane therefore assumes critical importance. In discussing the role of a society organized as a state in coping with the various interests, purposes, and group loyalties of its constituent individuals, the theoretical formulation of David Easton, a renowned political scientist, needs mention. Easton, in describing the nature of activity usually called politics, which the state exists to perform, defined politics as the activity pertaining to the authoritative allocation of values in society. The implication of this definition is very instructive of the nature and limits of the state's role. Firstly, the state is an agent for a society as a whole, and second, its role is the authoritative allocation of values among the members of the society. The use of words authoritatives and the values is most significant. Authoritative suggest finality in deciding who gets what in a state. Values refers the various things that a human being wants, desires, and aspires for. These desires range material thing to emotional and intellectual wants like affection, those near and dear, and respect from other sections of society as well as, in many cases, spiritual or moral satisfaction. The pursuit of these values result in some getting more satisfactions and rewards and some less. Usually not all get what they all want. This process without ever our noticing it goes on and on. In fact, when we reflect closely, all societal intercourse throughout history consisted and consists in the pursuit of these values by human beings. The family, the tribe, the village, larger communities informally and in different ways have been discharging this function of distributing values. It is important to remember that there has always been unequal distribution among people. Some feel dissatisfied that they get less of some values, and some throughout history were denied most of these for generations. What we today call the deprived sections were and are a common feature at all times and places. Still, the larger society manages to run or oversee the distribution system. But at certain point of time, protests reach a level when some authority has to settle the issue by force or persuasion and impose a solution. This is what can be called the authoritative allocation of values, as different from informal allocation going on. And this task of authoritatively settling claims, protests, violent clashes, even revolutions is performed by the state on behalf of society. Easton's definition has the merit of emphasizing the point that while the state is a society politically or legally organized, its function of maintaining law and order consists in managing conflicts in society so as ultimately to decide or accommodate social arrangements under which people pursue values with different degrees of success. That is why Harold J. Laswell, a well known social scientist, called politics as the study of who gets what, when, and how. The above discussion firstly makes clear the source of intrastate or intersocietal conflicts. Secondly, it points to the fact that in daily course of human activity in society, dissatisfactions and conflicts keep arising in matters relating to distribution of property, wealth, and social status, recognition, etc. And thirdly, that the state comes into the picture at the stage when the conflicts become so serious as to call for state or legal intervention. Here we want to wind up this lecture and thank you so much for your attention.